I started off as not a very good student. He's like, you are going to do far greater things than work on a retail sales floor and be in this business. You have to really pay attention to equity position because you can get squeezed out really fast.
Welcome to Money Mavericks, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of finance, investment, and entrepreneurship.
I'm Kirk Drake.
And I'm Daryl Hicks. Together, we're here to bring you the latest insights, expert opinions from the trailblazers who are redefining success in the financial world. Mr. Rallo, welcome. So excited to have you here for another episode of the Money Mavericks podcast. This is one that we've been looking forward to for quite a while. Kirk and I have been going back and forth. I know there's been a lot going on in your career in the last little bit. We'll have a chance to touch on that a little bit later, but buddy, super stoked to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. And thanks so much for having me on. And I'm really looking forward to talking today with both of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to usually do with guests. I'd love to kind of start at the start. I know a little bit about your story because of the friendship that we've built over the last few years. But for the audience, like, how does a guy start out working, on a retail shop floor to suddenly being CEO of a technology company, getting acquired by Amazon, then leading, hundreds of people on an org chart and a pretty significant P&L? I mean, it's been an amazing journey for you, but would love you to kind of like walk us through how that all started and how you ended up where you were.
We'll go in the Wayback Machine here. I started off as not a very good student. Like when I was in high school, I was more into sports than I was into academics. So I kind of scraped through and ended up somehow getting into RIT. So I'm from upstate New York in Rochester and got into RIT. And I was always pretty good with a computer. When I was about 8 years old, my mom traded a copy machine for a TRS-80 and I started programming. But back then, nobody really knew what I was doing. And, nobody really knew how powerful these things were actually going to be. Not in my house anyway. So the computer was like my fun time. Like I was playing video games or something, but I wasn't. I was like programming and learning how to make this thing work. I was pretty good at that. Wasn't great at math and science and a lot of the other stuff. But once I got into university and I was at RIT in computer science, I was pretty good. I was a pretty good programmer. Not a great programmer, but pretty good programmer for the time. So I, got through, had really good grades through university finally. It was hard sledding, but, I got up to speed on math and all that kind of stuff. And all during high school and grammar school, I worked for my stepfather, who owned a chain of retail furniture and appliance stores. So, my job back then, from the time I was like 8 years old through high school, was either working in the warehouse, sweeping floors, carrying stuff out to people's cars. Eventually I learned how to sell, and I got to sell, TVs and electronics and all that kind of stuff. And over the years, as I went through university, I worked for him full time. And when I finished school, I was like, hey, this is awesome. I'm done school now. I want to come and work for you full time and, set up this whole computer business and get you going on that. He's like, absolutely not. And I was like, crushed. I was like devastated. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you are going to do far greater things than work on a retail sales floor and be in this business. He's like, this computer thing, this internet thing, it's the real deal. You got to go do that. Go figure that out. And I'd had some internships and some jobs, but it just so happened that one of my neighbors, who my father also knew, was just recently spun out of Kodak to start a company in Rochester called Applied Graphics. And they did digital photo finishing for newspapers and magazines. And it was a startup. I was like the number 8 or 9 hire. We were a small group and I was a programmer. And that's when I learned I wasn't a very good programmer, but I was really good at lots of other stuff. And we ended up building systems to do online photo finishing for newspapers and magazines, which turned into online photo centers. So I got to really see what it was like in a startup environment. They had taken the company public. I got to work with some incredibly smart engineers and marketing people. And, I was on the road constantly. And it was just a ton of work. And I was just going. And I did that. We ended up selling that business to Fujifilm. And I was young. I was like 23, I made like three or $400,000. And I just thought, for a kid in Rochester, New York, that is a pile of money, back then. And it was great. It was a whole lot of fun. But, after the acquisition, it was not fun. Fuji did not acquire that company well. They kind of put a lot of controls on us and I ended up not wanting to stick around. So I went to Microsoft for a little while, got to build software at a really big scale. And then I came to Canada to run another online photo business up here in Vancouver called P&I Digital Media. That was a pretty cool company. When I got there, they didn't really have any customers and they didn't really have any money. And we ended up building an online photo platform that was used by just about every retailer in North America. And then we went out, did a couple acquisitions in the UK, bought a few companies over there, and we had pretty much a worldwide network of retailers: Costco, Jessup's, Asda, Boots, Walmart, CVS. Pick a retailer, they probably use the platform. And that was pretty wild. And we had data centers all over the world, and got to be the president and the COO of that company, publicly traded. That was a whole lot of fun. And then we exited that business to Staples in a private equity deal in, geez, I think it was like 2013, 2012, 2013. We finally exited that business. And along the way, I had this idea for reducing our data center power expenses. I was trying to figure out, how with all of our data centers, could we make the business more efficient? Because, our top line revenue was great, but our costs were pretty high. And most of our costs were IT infrastructure. And we were paying for our IT infrastructure 24/7, 365, when really we only needed the infrastructure for a few days a year. When somebody ran a commercial, Christmas time, US Thanksgiving, those were the big, the really big days. So I started thinking about, how do we reduce the costs? And I kind of came onto this idea of turning servers off when we didn't need them, because all of our costs were based on power costs. So I had an idea for a simple algorithm, and, kind of started thinking about that a little bit, employed some of the techniques to drive down our costs. But, once we exited that business, I was really interested in starting a company from scratch. So I started TSO Logic as soon as I could, self-funded it for a while, built the company up. We raised some capital, hired a really great team, a lot of the folks that I'd worked with in the previous companies. And we ended up building up that business, created go-to-market partnerships with all the cloud providers. I'm skipping over a lot of really hard stuff, by the way. Like the first 2 years of this business was freaking painful. It was just tough sledding. We were building product. We were, tried to do an enterprise sales cycle, which just did not work. But we finally ended up getting onto this model where we created go-to-market partnerships with Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. They were basically using our software to help get customers to migrate to the cloud. And then eventually, as we grew and got closer and closer with Amazon, they acquired us in 2019, and I went over there. And it's been a pretty wild 6 years at Amazon. And I just recently left. It's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, the LinkedIn post that you just wrote yesterday was very touching. It was a very warm and nice little farewell. And I know from the few years that you and I have known one another, like a wild ride, even just at Amazon itself. I mean, how big of a, if you don't mind sharing, like just ballpark, like how many people did you have on your team over there, and what were some of the specialties?
The really awesome thing, a lot of people have horror stories when they get acquired by a big partner, a big cloud provider, any big company.
Well, you had a taste of that when your first business got acquired by Fuji. And
Yeah,
now
it was
you're
terrible.
like, and then you're in this really big box, and it was a terrible experience. But then all of a sudden, you build another business that gets acquired by Amazon, and very different experience, right? So
Totally
I'd
different
love to
experience.
have you pull that apart a bit.
Yeah, totally different experience. I mean, the very first thing, like day one, we walked in the door, they were like, look, we want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. We just want you to do more of it. We always measured the business as how many workloads were analyzed with the software to see, how the cloud migration opportunities. And when we first were acquired, we were helping, many customers, tens of thousands, maybe a couple 100,000 workloads a year were running through the platform. And within the first year, we were helping millions. And then over the years, we were just doubling the business year on year, tripling the business year on year, to the point that we were helping tens of millions of workloads every year. And that's because the acquisition thesis when they did that deal was keep doing what you're doing, do more. So we grew the team, we expanded the tech. We did, when you're a small company, you don't have to worry a lot about security posture. As soon as you get inside of Amazon, you have to worry a lot about security posture, right? You just have a big bullseye on your back. So we did have an awful lot of security readiness and operational work that we had to do along with it. But the thesis was grow, get bigger, do more, help more customers, help us build the migration business even more. And that was pretty great because we were able to hire very fast. We grew our team from dozens to hundreds. And then over the years, we kept growing. We then, as we did more and more with our business, they added more to the portfolio. So we built new services and launched them. We absorbed existing services. There were some other periphery tools like data collection and things that Amazon already had. So we put that in. So that was pretty wild. It was a great learning experience. Just learning, learning the culture of Amazon and learning how, security and operations is job one all the time. Like you never stop thinking about security and operations. It just gets ingrained in you. And, that was a learning
Hmm.
curve. We grew, we got better, we got bigger. We were helping lots of customers. And then, once I kind of hit that mark of, okay, my vesting time is kind of over, I was actually planning to leave. I was like, okay, now's a good time. And then, ChatGPT got released and we started doing more and more with AI. And I was like, this is a couple years ago. And I was just like, oh man, I just love this stuff. And there is no better place in the world to learn this technology than a company like Amazon or a Google or a
Hmm.
Microsoft. These big guys, right? Because there's just so many resources, right? I mean, we had access to Anthropic before anybody else did. We had our own models. We were, innovating in a very early stage, and I had an opportunity to stay and run a division, basically rebuilding almost all of our old software using AI agents to replace a lot of that work. And I was like, wow,
Wow.
I
How much
really
faster was it
want to
to
do that.
rebuild it?
Oh my God. It was like like a tenth. Like it
Yeah.
was, we had all of these proprietary models for doing this activity we had called right sizing, where we would look at the age and the type and the generation of a server running on-prem, and then we'd figure out, the best AWS EC2 instance size or the best storage size or the best compute cluster to make it work. And to maintain that was a huge pain in the butt. Like every time new models came out, we had to update it. Like we replaced that in like 10 minutes, and it
Yeah.
was so much easier and so much faster. And then, where it got super interesting was when we had agents that could actually take some of these actions. And then, because we used to rely on humans to connect all these dots. So it was like, oh, I just generated this business case. Now download it, do something with it, take the results of it, upload it to this other thing when you're ready to do the next step, and then hand that off to another human to do the next steps. And, every time you hand something off from one human to another, what happens? You lose time. Right. And
Right.
then, and then, sometimes you lose a lot of time. You can lose weeks, months, years. So by automating those pieces and stitching together end to end with agents that could then do the work with a human in the loop, you're really able to speed things up. And this is just one of many use cases, but it was a really powerful one for us.
Yeah, definitely want to talk more about the use cases for AI and for agents. I saw this meme on social media the other day where, like, you're just talking to a group of CEOs, what do you want? AI. When do you want it? Now. What do you want it for? We don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon and feels like they're going to get left behind if they don't have an AI strategy. The thing I love about your experience working at Amazon is you guys were in there solving real world problems at scale with speed, and you had access to like some of the best engineering minds out there in
Yeah.
creating this stuff. So would love to talk more about that, but a couple themes I'd like to pull out of the origin story. One, I think very common with a lot of successful founders, they had a job at some point where they had to learn to sell
Yeah.
and how to deal with people saying no to you and the discomfort of walking up and talking to people. So I think there is definitely like little nuggets of clues in there, like the whole
Yeah.
learning how to sell thing.
Yeah.
Do you
Um,
remember the first like stove or oven or appliance that you sold? On Money Mavericks, we don't just talk about making money. We explore the innovative strategies and bold decisions that drive real change. Whether you're an experienced investor, a budding entrepreneur, or just someone looking to make smarter financial choices, we've got something for you.
Every week, we're going to sit down with industry leaders, visionaries, and mavericks who share their journeys, challenges, and breakthroughs, from contrarian views on market trends to the secrets behind building a successful startup. You get an inside look at what it takes to thrive in today's economy.
And we promise to keep it real, engaging, and most importantly, actionable. No jargon, no fluff. Just straightforward conversations that you can apply to your own financial journey.
So get ready to challenge your thinking, expand your knowledge, and take control of your financial future. This is Money Mavericks,
where we turn financial dreams into realities and mavericks into legends.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, it's crazy because I remember the very first time that I had the guts to actually say some words to a customer. I was actually carrying something out to their car. They came in and bought a dehumidifier. And we used to sell tons of this is in Buffalo, New York, right? We sold tons of dehumidifiers, air conditioners in the summer. And I'm carrying it out to their car. And I just decided to say to the guy, hey, we also have these, 21-inch TVs on sale. They're like $98. And the guy's like, oh, I actually need a TV for my office. And he went back in the store and bought the TV. And I was just like, is it that easy? I was like, was it really that easy? It's like, but if I never said the words, we never did that deal. And then I just learned the power of asking. And that really translated, right?
It's amazing
Just,
how many times you'll get a yes with an ads, especially in consumer goods. My first sales were I worked at a vacuum janitorial supply store, and at age 14, I decided to start trying to sell vacuums because I saw that the sales guys earned like a $50 commission. I was making like $4 an hour. I was like, "Sure, I can do this," and I think I sold 3 of them, and they're like, "How did you do that? Nobody ever
yeah.
sells vacuums around here."
Yep. Yeah. Extended warranties, like selling
Yeah.
extended warranties on stuff, like learning how to say, hey, for $9.99, that's 100, that's like all profit.
Yeah. I
Easy
think,
money.
we've had a lot of guests on the pod before who have kids or who really care about mentoring kids. I know it's something you're really deeply passionate about as well. And part of why I like pulling on these threads is that I think as we think about what kind of skills we want our kids to have, like you can't draw a straight line between working on a retail sales floor and being CEO of a division with like hundreds of employees working for you in technology, right? But there are common themes and elements, and some of these skills transfer. So getting kids access to these opportunities where they have to go learn how to go talk to strangers and get comfortable with being said no to a lot, right? Or how to put themselves out. Another one I wanted to pull on though is this really cool inflection point with the family mentor. That message of like, you're meant for something greater than this.
Yeah.
Like, what a gift. It reminded me, Kirk, you remember we had that conversation with Dan when he found himself in juvie as a teenager, and it was actually a prison guard who pulled him aside after a fight had broken out in prison and said to him, like, what are you doing here? You're different than all the other kids that are here. You're meant for something greater than this. And he never forgot that. And that created a huge inflection point for him in his life. And what I love about Dan is that now he goes back to that juvie every year and he tries to be that person to the kids and say, hey, I used to be here in this same prison and look at where I am now. And I think that that's something that we really, it's so easy to do. It doesn't require a massive amount of effort, but it can be so powerful in a teenager's life. Like to be the person who says to them, hey, I see something in you. You are destined for really great things. And what a powerful, powerful gift that can be. And again, just saying no to them, right? Like you wanted this job. You thought this is where you were going to go, but he said no to you. And he's like, no, man, you're going to go do really great things. I think
Yeah.
that was something that really stood out to me that I thought was really
Yeah.
special.
Oh
And
man, I was
then,
crushed. I was crushed at the time. I was just like,
My
everybody
dad,
works.
my
Like,
dad, my dad did the same thing. He had a telemetry systems company making circuit boards and stuff, and I wanted to, out of high school, go build. He had a card catalog inventory system. It was brutal, and I was like, "Can I just convert this to like Access or Turbo Pascal?" And he's like, "No, you do not need to work in this company. That's not an option. Go find your own way."
yeah.
And I'm still not sure it's the right decision, right? But like, I also don't know that it was the wrong decision, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
mm,
I was actually super lucky, as we're talking about it, I'm just thinking about another example of that where when I was working in that first startup, Applied Graphics, I was working, 90 hours a week. I was like tech support, programming support for newspapers and magazines that operate 24/7. And if you want to work on any of their actual systems, you're doing it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So, I had an apartment in New York City. I'd be out there. I'd go. I'd never know when I was coming home. And I was not making a lot of money. I was like, this is early on. I remember one night I'm in New York City, it's pouring rain, and I'm like trying to find a cable, like a SCSI cable or something to hook this thing up. And I was like, this is just ridiculous. And I had another neighbor on the same street who offered me a job in her printing press business, who else she wanted to do more digital stuff. So like they actually all knew each other. Like, the people that got me to Applied Graphics, this woman, Georgia McCabe and Scott Brownstein, just wonderful. They started Photo CD at Kodak and then spun out. Genius people. They were friends with and neighbors with Valerie, who offered me this other job. So I got back from that New York trip. I went into their office and I was like, look, Valerie offered me a job. I'm going to take it. And they said, okay, great. I'm not accepting your resignation. I need you on the next plane to Chicago. We got a customer there. We'll talk about it when you get back. And I was like, fine, whatever. So I go to Chicago. I get a phone call when I'm there. They're like, hey, I need you to go meet Carmen Romanelli at the Bull Stadium. He's got a floor pass for you for Jordan's last game in Chicago. Game 5 or 6, I think it was, of the NBA Finals when they were playing the Jazz. And my job was to run media from a camera on the court back to the back room. And I was like young and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I got back home after that trip and she's like, do you still want to quit? And I was like, well, not really. That was pretty awesome. And she goes, she's like, you're not ready to leave here yet, Aaron. She's like, you need to stay. You're not ready for the next level to do this totally on your own. You need to be here for a few more years and learn from the really smart engineers we have and from us. And she was right. You never know what would have happened if you wouldn't have, but they kind of did the same thing. It was very maternal. It was a very family type environment there, but also grateful for that. And, that's happened a few times in my life where people are just like, no, Aaron, you really need to do this. And it's made me not afraid to say that to younger folks that I come across.
That's beautiful. I love that. The other thing that I heard, which again, super, super common, cannot tell you how many times we run into founders where their really great business idea that got scale and traction was scratching their own itch. Like this big problem that you had inside of your business with data centers and the cost and trying to solve for that. And again, just because you understood the pain and had a good idea about how to solve the pain doesn't mean automatically that you know how to build that business. Like I love that you said, hey, it was 2 years of like tough sledding, I think was the way that you put it, like trying to get that thing up and running and going. But eventually you got there and it turns out that you were not alone. There were other people that also had that problem, which go figure. That's the way markets go. And I also love the theme of teams that win together, stick together. That's something else that I see, like having guys who are like willing to jump ship and say, hey, you know what? I want to go with you. Because like that old cliche says, like, you don't get to choose to be a leader. People have to choose to follow you. So clearly like seeing something in you and this idea that you had and wanting to jump in was really, really key. I love those themes. And I think they're super common with successful serial entrepreneurs and founders.
It just melts my heart to know that some of the folks that I've worked with have been 3-4 companies. Chris, my co-founder at TSO Logic, he and I started working together in Rochester. We were in our 20s. We just went company to company. We were together in Rochester. He moved to Vancouver to be part of that company. And then when I started TSO Logic, he was, he left that job, he came into TSO. And there's a few people like that just, there's actually quite a few people.
Have you carried the economic model similarly each time, or was it a little different based on the transaction and what was going on? Did everybody get where it was, hey, we're all, 3 Musketeers, 33% each, or did you have some other approach to it?
Since I had self-funded most of these things from the beginning, for the most part, the only one that I started from scratch was TSO Logic. The other 2 were existing companies. So I kind of came into those companies and had equity. And, a couple of things that I learned along the way is, you have to really pay attention to equity position because you can get squeezed out really fast. You get diluted out really, really quick. And, when I set up TSO Logic, I wanted to make sure that I didn't get diluted out, but also anybody that I brought in, I wanted to make sure they didn't get diluted out.
Yeah.
Right. Because I knew what happened to me and I didn't want it to happen to them.
Yeah.
So, we basically, TSO Logic was really interesting because it was all common shares. We didn't take any VC money. It was all, a glorified friends and family round. And then I got into
no pref stack in that business getting acquired.
No pref stack. It was all common. And, my shareholders trusted me and I made sure we did the right thing by them in the end. And it was unconventional for sure, but I'm really happy with how it all played out.
I want to shift gears because there's just a tremendous amount of wisdom that you have. You touched on this inflection point where you were kind of getting ready to leave. You had done your time. You were really successful. You were growing the business inside of Amazon. And then all of a sudden, ChatGPT comes out. And I remember talking to you back then. It was like this really tough moment. Like, this seems like too big of an opportunity to miss out, which good on you to have the foresight and to stay at that macro level and say, I think I need to change my plans because I don't know exactly what this is all going to look like or how this is going to shake out. Actually, you know what? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah. I want to ask you some nerdy AI questions. Kirk and I both have some things that we want to get into that I think the audience will really benefit from because everybody wants to know more about these tools. But what was the self-talk as you were going through that at Amazon? You were getting ready to leave. You're thinking seriously about it. And then all of a sudden, this AI wave is just getting started. Like, walk us through what was going on inside of your head and how you were making that calculus.
Yeah, a big part of it for me was that I felt like a little kid again, learning how to program in BASIC. Like I was learning something new and the best part was I wasn't behind because it was all just starting. And, for a lot of other technology that's happened, like, you know what it's like, right? I mean, you start off as an engineer, you're in the weeds, you're programming, you're really close to the product. And, as the business grows, no matter how hard you try, you get less into it. Right? You're not programming anymore. You're not writing SQL anymore. You're not doing the things that you can do. You're probably still in all your product meetings. Like I really hope most CEOs are still in their product meetings, but you definitely lose a little touch. And then some of the technology begins to eclipse, like database technology kind of leapfrogged me, right? As soon as we started getting into, NoSQL, and yeah, I was really good at relational databases. As soon as you get into graph and all those other ones, I just didn't stay tuned with that trend. So I sort of fell behind in that realm. When AI, it's just one example. When AI came out, I was like ground level and just started learning it. And I started learning it with some really smart engineers. Like we have these principal engineers that are just, frankly, some of the most amazing engineers you could possibly imagine. And they're not just engineers; they can actually communicate with executives. So like that's sort of their superpower. So the self-talk for me in this was like, wow, in 3 weeks, I just learned more than most people are going to learn in a year because I have access to all these people and I'm asking all these questions. And one of the Amazon leadership principles, which will always be ingrained in me, is learn and be curious. And learn and be curious is awesome because it pretty much gives you the freedom and flexibility to ask a question about anything, anytime, anywhere. You can reach across organizational boundaries and ask questions to somebody that runs a fulfillment center and a robotics unit. It could be just under the learn and be curious. And I think that's pretty cool. So I just started asking all these questions and started learning an awful lot. And then, I was like, okay, here's what went on in my head. I was like, I know that I probably want to start another company. And with all this AI stuff now, it's going to have to be an AI based company. Like we're going to have to use AI. So I can either leave here, learn AI on my own, and then start a company, or I can stay here, learn AI, maybe build and ship something with AI, which is what we ended up doing, and then leave and go start another company. So, and I was like, what's the alternative? I want to take some time off work. Great. If I take time off work now and all this technology just leapfrogs me, I'm going to be behind the eight ball. I was like, I want a head start. And that's sort of how I got to the spot where I was like, I really want to do this.
Yeah, just an incredible, incredible opportunity. And that's what I'd love you to unpack. Like from a practical perspective, some of the things that you saw where these AI tools were actually moving the needle. You touched on one briefly, like refactoring code for like monitoring every time a new server model comes out at AWS. How is this going to map to like, the legacy on-prem stuff that clients have, right? And building like agents around that. But or maybe even like, what's this agentic approach that you guys were taking to this? Maybe you can kind of unpack that a little bit while also talking about some of the real world scenarios where you saw AI moving the needle.
Yeah. And the first thing I want to clarify is like there's a few different dimensions of how AI can be used. You can use an existing tool. You can use AI to write code that is new tools. You can build individual small micro AI agents that can talk to other AI agents and do things, right? But in order to have agents that talk to each other, you need a platform that backends all of that communication so that one agent knows handoff and messaging to the other agent, so then that agent can begin to do things. So, and then, by the way, you also need to be able to absorb data so that you can actually operate on it. So what was pretty cool about what we were doing is we had to do all of those things. So it wasn't like we were just using AI to write software because that's actually been around for a while. What we were working on was the primitives that were needed to build out all of those other systems. And, we started off, trying to solve things like dealing with unstructured data. One of the most unique challenges that I think a lot of companies deal with, not just Amazon, is you need to train these models. Well, we can't use any customer data to train these models. So you have to generate synthetic data. Well, how do you generate synthetic data? Well, one way to generate synthetic data is to look at the real data, but you can't do that either because you're worried that the patterns of the real data will show up in your synthetic data, right? So that was off the table. So we literally had to do synthetic data generation. Like if anybody out there is looking for an awesome startup idea, figure out how to crack synthetic data generation because every company needs it and it's really, really hard. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to get to a spot where you have it.
Elon's even been talking about this as being like the next big frontier for training the new models at Grok is like they're running out of real world data, either that they legally have access to or that is available, period. And so synthetic data is the new frontier and it's a hard problem.
Yeah, that's right. Some companies that, you accept terms and conditions, and they get to do a lot of stuff with your data. A company like Amazon is not allowed to do. Like we had hard and fast rules inside. Like we just never used customer data to train anything. And not everybody, I think, would do that. But at a company like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, you have to follow those rules. So we got to work on all of these areas. And interestingly, it's not easy to connect all these pieces together. When you've got multiple agents that need to communicate with each other in a secure way, and you want to make sure that you're going to maintain data privacy, not just from a training data perspective, but as they're using these tools, there's an awful lot of work that has to be done to keep the data isolated, to make sure the agents only have access to what they need, to make sure that you have human in the loop before actions actually get taken. Every one of those things requires a whole bunch of setup and platform components. And then on top of that, you have to instrument all these things so that you know what your agents are doing. And you have to instrument it in a way that you can measure it and you can know if things are going sideways and you can debug. All of that, it's not something people think a lot about when they think about building AI. When they're using AI, they don't think about it ever. So like users of AI and builders of AI have very different challenges that they need to overcome.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Money Mavericks. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it.
Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website for exclusive resources, episode transcripts, and more.
Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, making smart moves, and turning your financial dreams into realities.
You've been listening to Money Mavericks, where Mavericks become legends.